My name is Vagif. I'm a Russian-Norwegian developer, originally from Russia, but I've been living for many years in Norway. I work as a consultant in Norwegian company Miles, and I have been working many years with C# and last 4 or 5 years working mainly with FSharp. And these are my contact details. If you want to contact me, feel free to do that. And this is our product. I'm working in a project for Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation, NRK. It's a Norwegian analog of BBC. So in our team, what we do is we develop and maintain service that uploads everything which NRK produces or licenses to the cloud. So people can view, watch, listen to TV, radio programs, podcasts on different devices. And of course, there are great requirements to our services when it comes to stability, scalability, and so on. And if something goes wrong, we have to react quickly. So it will be part of what actually motivated this talk. But I'm a backend developer. Actually, this is one of the first times I'm speaking about front-end applications. And if somebody asked me like 2 years ago that I would dare speaking at conference about front-end, I would probably shrug my shoulders in disbelief, because no, how come I can speak about something on a front-end? But actually, I think I have something to share with you. Because the path to become front-end developer, well, on demand, when you need something on a front end, became quite shorter, much shorter than actually I expected a couple of years ago. Who in this room consider themselves as mainly backend developers? Okay, so we are on the same boat. Who is mainly front-end developer? Okay, good. Who is full stack developer? Few hands. Okay, so we have a good combination, but majority of people are backend developers. And I should probably spend some time on the motivation line. Why should a backend developer care about user interface? Backend services, accessing databases. And there is another group doing user interface. So why should we? Because there is a stereotype that we backend developers, we should be fine with console application, and we should easily understand commands, and this is what makes us very efficient, just to send commands, and this is what we can do quickly. I guess most of us know what Git is, and are there any Git command line masters who can tell me what this command does? I have to admit, I had no idea what this command does. I just Googled about, the longest Git command, which is hard to understand. Actually, it does quite a simple thing: show the authors of unmerged branches. So, if you think about us writing command tools for ourselves, and we're working in an organization that where failures need to be handled quickly, perhaps it's not something that we want to promote to our colleagues. Well, of course, we have internal views of state of our system, and this is from our project. As I mentioned, we're uploading lots of TV and radio programs, and so this is a quick way to look at the status of the program. It tells about different file qualities, bandwidths, and so on. But we do have postmortems. Who has postmortem? It's an event if something goes wrong, and you need to have a discussion, often across different departments, what went wrong and how to become better. A few hands, just very few. But we must have them, because if the worst thing happens when end users, when actually TV viewers call or send mails saying that they don't have subtitles, that they can't watch certain news clips, and what we noticed that if there is a production failure, which we handle quickly, then we actually don't need to have this post-mortem across organization, because this is something that maybe it won't even be noticed by different departments. But of course, if the end user is affected, then something is not right. It means that people on the other side, they were quicker than us finding out our failures. There is something wrong with visualizing state of our application, and we need to care about it. Just to give you an example, when I was preparing this talk, I made some screenshots, and that was status of some TV program that was being uploaded. And uploading progress looks fine. Upload started. I made it in August, in 25th of August. Looks good. Until I checked that actually upload started 21st of August, but the upload in progress date was 25th. Like, the program can't be uploading for 4 days. Something is wrong, which means that there is no correct visualization of how things, what is the status of things in reality. So it shows just some snapshot of things, and then definitely we can be better than that, showing the importance of what's going on. There is a great talk by David Evans called Visualizing Quality, which I recommend to watch anyone, no matter if you work with backend or front end. He shows actually how misleading can things become if we show just part of information, including catastrophic failures like loss of aircraft. He goes through this tragedy in, I think it was 1986, when the spacecraft was lost, because actually people on the ground were aware of certain problems, but they were not aware of how radical can be consequences. And he, being a British, he gives a quite interesting example. Let's say you are in Paddington train station, and you want to get to Lancaster Gate. And most of the people probably look at this lines. Okay, you first take 2 stops to Notting Hill Gate, then you make a transfer, and then you go to Lancaster Gate. But this is quite schematic map. You see all angles are either 90 or 45 degrees. If you look at a geographically correct map of London Tube, you will see that this is Paddington, this is Lancaster Gate. So actually you travel back, all the way back, 2 stations, and then 2 stations, you're coming almost to Paddington. You might suspect that actually if you don't have a lot of luggage, maybe it's quicker for you to just go to Lancaster Gate. And in fact it is. Because if you Google and you find that it takes 9 minutes with tube and only 7 minutes walking. So this is how lack of proper visualization, incorrect details can mislead us. You can think that this is exceptional case. This is what my impression. That is really exception, because most of people plan the trips properly, because you have to be very picky to find these stations. And then I tried to Google, maybe there are some statistics about how many people misplan their trips in London, and I was surprised. Actually, about 30% of passengers misplan their trips by looking at geographically incorrect London Tube map. That's kind of interesting observation. Why am I saying this? It's because when we look at our internal dashboards, internal service states, we should actually raise questions. Are we getting right picture? This is a dashboard from our project. It shows some internal queues and number of messages in the queues, and there are shown green if there are less than 25 messages, then they're showing yellow, orange, and if there are more than 500 messages, they're showing red. So actually everything is green. But this is just snapshot for the given time. What if certain queue never had a message for last few days? It's probably red. So we expanded this dashboard by adding this view of actually how many files have been uploaded during last 2 hours. So if this stays 0, it means that there is something wrong is going on. So that's just an example that if you use default dashboards, and who is using Kibana dashboards? Few hands. Grafana dashboards. Almost same number. Other types of dashboards which you like don't need to write yourself. You just like application is sites or anything else. Yeah, few hands, but some. So they're all opinionated, and they show just part of reality. Of course, you can spend time on expanding them, but then quickly you will start thinking that okay, maybe I could better off on writing my own custom representation of what's going on in our system. And of course, they're all read-only. They can't, if you see something and want to react quickly, they won't let you do it. So we backend developers actually should care about QA, especially in organizations when our failures can lead to critical consequences, and we need to act during a short time. And we have Commandline tools, but sometimes they might look like snobbish because like, okay, we know them, we know these commands, but we can't really promote it to the whole organization. We have dashboards, which are just read-only, often opinionated. They serve very good day purposes, but probably not all purposes that we want them to serve. So that leads us to the path to actually writing a custom website. And then, okay, what should we do? Should we learn JavaScript, CSS? Of course, it's a viable option, and many developers actually become full-stack developers. They first work with backends, and then they go and learn JavaScript, CSS, and they become full-stack developers. Also, paths can go the other way. Like people from front end, they start learning how to develop backends. Of course, you can go different paths. Learn ASP.NET, PHP, Spring MVC. That's also a viable option which actually leads to efficient results. Both of them, unfortunately, not necessarily unfortunately, but you have to learn and maintain within your web application several languages. It's typically a combination of HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and the programming language of your choice. You can also team up with the front-end developers, but I wouldn't consider it as a great option unless you can team up like all the time. If you just sort of borrow time of front-end developer from different team, there is limited amount of knowledge you can learn within couple of sessions, because it's quite different approach to writing front-end and writing back-end. Or you can think about adopting some of relatively new approaches, and there are even languages written specifically to handle that actually let you develop front-end applications, websites, staying within same language all the time, doing it in a functional way, making very clean models, immutable models. And one of best opportunities which I recommend you to invest since you are attended this talk is to look at a language called Elm. Who knows something about Elm? Yeah, few hands. So Elm, since it's functional language, who is friends with functional languages, like who makes friends with functional languages, likes FP. Very few hands. So it may scare people because, and this is a guy who wrote his initial impression without actually learning Elm. So okay, these are some FP freaks who wrote this language, but he actually changed completely his mind once he started experimenting and writing applications in this language. This is why actually I quoted him. So Elm is purely functional. It has strong static types, so it's not dynamic. So there is no duck typing. It doesn't have null, so undefined. So you don't have runtime exceptions with Elm, which is very rare for front-end applications. And it's reactive by design, and it compiles to JavaScript. So it was designed specifically for building front-end web applications. It's quite short path to actually start using Elm, and there is a lot of resources. So you can just start with this one, elmlang.org, and from this site you quickly go. You can explore it, and then you go to different directions, and there is a lot of tutorials, a lot of free materials, and you'll be surprised how compact is your code and how much you actually can achieve within a short time. Elm programming model, it's called model view update. So you have a model which you initialize, and it's immutable. You can't really change it from your application. You can only create a new model based on the old one by changing some fields. So there is never in-place update. So it's full immutability. So typically you get some command. You display using view the model. You get some command which goes through Elm runtime. You update model, get a new model, and then you sending it back to the view. So there are few main parts of Elm architecture. It's of course you have a model, you have initial state, you have a view which transfers model and applies some HTML messages to it, and you get a new model. Of course you have messages, you have updates based on some commands. Typically one thing, if you get a message, this is something that you have inside your web application, users typing something. Commands coming when you sending some asynchronous requests to services, to other websites, and then you get asynchronously response, which you again update and apply to your model, and you get a new copy of your model. And you have also subscriptions, because often we need to subscribe on some something which happened externally and keep getting information. So this is a subscription. So that's typically foundation of Elm architecture, and Elm applications are built this way. And this is the simplest Elm program. You have main, you define it as HTML program, which you define init, view, update, and subscriptions. So that's very good start. Actually, if you want to explore a little bit of functional programming and you are not from .NET community, even if you're from .NET community, I would recommend to have a look at Elm, who developing applications mostly at .NET platform, majority. So for you, there may be another option or combination of those two. It's to look at something which uses Elm architecture, but on .NET platform. And there is a open source project called Fable, which is FSharp to JavaScript compiler. Probably just few people familiar with FSharp. Who is familiar with FSharp? Yeah, maybe like 5–10%. we will run through some FSharp code. You will see actually that's also great. If you're not familiar with FSharp, that's a great way to start learning it because it's quite simple and the code is quite compact. So what Fable does, it compiles FSharp into JavaScript. So it's compiled powered by Babel, and it eventually generates JavaScript. It's immutable by default, so it's also like Elm. And FSharp has interop with .NET, so you have mutability with FSharp, but by default, your data are immutable. You get type safety. You have very easy JavaScript interop, and first-class editor support. We will look at how it looks in Visual Studio Code. You can also use it with Rider. You can also use it with Visual Studio. Even it's a bit heavier with Visual Studio, in my opinion. You don't need to use interop with React, but Fable integrates smoothly with React components. It's compatible with Redux development tools. So actually all React tools which available through Chrome extension, they are available also for Fable applications. And there's an extra component called Fable Elmish, which implements model view update architecture introduced by Elm. What is another interesting thing is that if you want to use some CSS, then you should typically need to quickly start learning CSS details of certain framework. But there are libraries for Fable which actually packs CSS support into strongly typed libraries, like Fulma, like Material UI. We will have a look at Fulma. It's one of examples how you can use, you can get access to CSS. So you have IntelliSense, you have strong type support, and actually you don't need on early stages to learn CSS details. Then the question, of course, is it production ready? And then I must admit that I've been looking at Elm, I've been looking at Fable Elmish, and actually we needed to create some internal applications. We lacked some great visualization tools in our organization, but I was thinking, okay, this is something new. I mean, should I really introduce it? For me, I've been spending quite some time hesitating to start developing something with either Elm or Fable Elmish, and I think many of us probably experience that we have something that is interesting for us, but we think it's a great responsibility to introduce something new. And for me, it was a turning point. About a year ago, I attended Oslo Elm Day. It was one-day conference, and there was a guy, probably half of my age, talking about experience at NSB. It's a Norwegian railway road organization, so it's as enterprise as organization can be. It's a huge organization, and then they adopted Elm. They were basically stuck in development their web applications, so development was not going smoothly, and it was delivering schedule was quite slow. And then there were some youngsters, some of them, I think this guy, Jonas Berdal, he was even a practicant at that time. So probably they didn't realize that you just don't bring new things in such large organization. You have to go to some forums and committees. So they sort of created prototype, and they were lucky that actually management organization was really friendly to their suggestion. So now, if you buy through mobile phone ticket at Norwegian Railway Road, then actually using Elm application. So all web applications at this organization, they actually powered by Elm. So for me, it was kind of trigger. We just come back and we start doing something. So I will show extract of what we achieved actually in a very short development time. It's Event Journal Web, which is we're using event sourcing. So we receive different services send events to us, which we store before processing in event journal. And this event journal goes to Azure Table Store, Azure Blobstore, you can, of course, look at Azure Table and Blob Stores like this. This is Azure Storage account, but again, if something goes wrong, what time do you need to figure out what is wrong? Because this is really hard to see. Because querying looks like this. So you need to select some row and then you need to query. So it takes minutes basically to get anything out of the system. Then we moved further and then we created Azure Function. So that's sort of one step forward because we have a nice web API on the top of Azure storage accounts. But still, it's not good enough because it's, of course, you get logically, you get your domain events, but that's not fast enough if we need to react quickly on something. So we wanted to create something like this, and this is actually a snapshot of the application which we created for internal use, where we can quickly select there are different service types. We display some data. We click on data, and then there is some information that the payload of the event. And there are quite powerful search capabilities of this application. So I will show you how to create such application. And so what we need a web page where you have buttons for different journals. And of course, you need to have some search modes. You can search by time interval, you can search by certain ID. And you need some shortcuts for like 1 hour, 4 hours, 24 hours. And so when you search by certain criteria, you get some events, and you should be able to select event and you get its payload. So how advanced can we become without writing custom JavaScript, without learning CSS, in writing applications like that? So now we have a plan, what we want to achieve. So we're switching to live demo from now on. And in the remaining time, we will create FSharp model type to represent our application state. We will create so-called discriminated union. It's in functional language, it's called sum type. It's you can compare it with enum, but it's kind of enum on steroids, because it's enum with some additional information attached to it. Then we create HTML page with controls and handlers. So actually, we will get a running application with just pure HTML, and you will see how ugly it is. But it will work. Then we start adding CSS first in very minimalistic way, without like learning any custom CSS word, and see how far we can go. And we'll see some shortcomings of this application. Then we start exploring what we can learn from CSS to make it look nicer. And in the end, if we have time, we even show how to add React components, so we can prettify XML and JSON. So let's get started. And let me show the development environment. I think you can all see this. So this is Visual Studio Code. And here I'm running a terminal. So actually there is a, every time I make some change, it detects a change, it recompiles everything, and we will see that the web page is immediately updated. I'm using Visual Studio Code with a custom, with a plugin which is called Ionide, which is FSharp plugin. And that's basically what you need to start working with FSharp using Visual Studio Code, just Visual Studio Code and Ionide. So this is our model. You can see that you get IntelliSS from through Ionide, so it's very efficient. You you have all information at your hand. So we define type event source. We have different event journals, and this is so-called discriminated union. So even if you're not familiar, I guess you will understand what it means. So it's a sum type. So it's either or. If you have event source, it's either omnibus. Don't try to interpret these names. It's just internal names of our services. For example, Radio Archive, it's a Norwegian radio archive. It's a payload for radio program. Subtitles, as you can guess, it's we're getting XMLs, quite large XMLs with subtitle information. Potion, it's a news clips, and so on. So this is our first type. Event collection. Some event collections, they can has common ID, so you can actually search with the same ID through all collections. Some not. And search mode by interval, by ID. And there are search intervals, 1 hour, 4 hours, 1 day, and custom. There is search status. It's either idle, we're ready for the search, or we can it can be running, so we're searching for something. Of course, every developer should be exposed to time zone, and so in Norway we have it's not UTC based, so it's either local or UTC. And this is service event, and this is a record type. It's similar to class. It's just that it's easier to work with records. They have structural equality. So if you compare two records, they all data compared by value. And then, so this is some information like service name, when it event was created, some information how it's stored in Azure Table Store, partition key, for example. Then event content, and it's an object because it can be of type XML or JSON. Content type is none if you don't know what it is, JSON or XML. And search models, and there are some application settings, and so on. So you see the size of this model, and there are some helper functions like model has valid ID, has valid from time. So it's 100 lines, a little bit more than 100 lines. And I guess we all agree that even if you're not familiar with FSharp, it looks quite simple to understand. Next thing we need to define is messages. And so everything which happens asynchronously. So, for example, when we start the program, we need to load application settings. So we send the command load application settings, and then it can be loaded or it can fail loading. So there are two outcomes: upsettings loaded, upsetting error. So we define two messages for that. Then there's a group of search options: search by ID, by interval, interval 1 hour, and so on. And then there are certain commands when control changes occur, like program ID change, from time change, and so on. So it's it looks quite understandable. And then search result handlers. We start search, which can either complete or fail, and then we can also load content of event payload, and also this loading can either succeed or fail. So these are just all our messages. So and the third thing we need to define to actually to close the processing loop is to create update handle. It's also written in FSharp. First we define since we're using Elmish model, so Elm Architecture, we need to define initial state of model. So everything with just complete emptiness. And then so update is typically, it's just a, we reacting on different events. And these handlers are quite small. For example, program ID changed. You see that everything is immutable. We can't just go to the model record and change its ID. We create a new model with ID equals to that new ID. So it's not in place change. Model with, it means that create a new structure, copy all values from the old one, and then put a new data there. And CMD none means that, okay, we're done. No more commands to apply. So I think even without proper form experience with FSharp, you can handle this quite quickly. And with Elm, it works similar way. So again, it's your choice if you want to experiment with Elm on or FSharp. And then, of course, we need HTML view. So our first approach is just to create raw HTML. So you have here divs, disabled, checked, handlers on change, and so on. So it's HTML, but not in file HTML. Actually, it's FSharp file. We're using React. You see, Fable React props. Fable React. So it's React interop, which defines all all basic HTML functionality. So we writing web page almost as plain HTML, but it's strong typed, and you get anti-lizard support. So if I click on something, I get support from Ionide plugin. So if you run such a web page, it will look like this. So actually, it's a working page. So we can choose like radio archive, search. Okay, let me search. Yeah, and we get some results. And if I click on some result, I get payload. So purely technically, actually, we done. Like if you think about information exchange, we got what we wanted from Azure Table and Blobstore, and we displayed it here at using HTML page. But and actually, I know I have a colleague who would think that this is good-looking page. He's a real hardcore backend developer, and he thinks, I mean, this is fine. Don't spend time on anything else. But of course, I swear that if you have a customer, even internal colleagues who would like to have a web page, they won't be happy with that. So the next step, how can we, in a minimalistic way, to improve it without learning CSS by throwing some CSS? So basically same HTML, but we just start throwing some CSS. And there are some great frameworks around. Our choice is Bulma, which is open source, free CSS framework. And the reason I'm choosing it, actually, I'm not familiar with, I wasn't familiar with any CSS frameworks, but this one has a nice FSharp wrapper, which is called Fulma. What it gives to you, it wraps everything Bulma offers, or almost everything, the most essential things, into FSharp types and functions, so you actually can feel at home. You can use strong types. It's very well documented. So if you choose something, let's say button. So this is color buttons, view code. So it shows how you write code which ends up with such buttons. So let's try to add Fulma to our code and see how things will change. So we switch from HTML view, this is a raw HTML view, to minimal Fulma view. Minimal is just we try to use as little Fulma as possible, just to make things nicer looking. So I will quickly show you, I will not go into low-level details of that, but the code is not that big. It's about 200 lines of code. So what we see here, for example, let me show you. It's actually responsive, so you can define that for what types of screen, how it will behave. Now, in this case, I want to be minimalistic, and I say, okay, for all screens, use like 1/4 of the screen. I can be more specific and choose different types of screen and specify different size of my components. And and here let's see, for example, text size is 7. So there are some text sizes which I'm just experimented a little. For example, colors. I didn't want to work with some color codes. So the background color is light. Okay, looks nice. Let's use it. Table is narrow. So I'm defining table and I want to be narrow. Table is hoverable, which means that if I hover over the table, then I can get some additional information. So you see, it's quite easy to learn because Fulham has very good documentation. So what we do now, we will change now HTML view to minimal Fulham view. Minimal Fulham view. You see, we get IntelliSense from Unite, and actually our application is getting recompiled, compiled successfully. Okay, let's go back to our event. You see, it's changed. So it was HTML view, now it's minimal Fulham view. So I guess it looks much better than it was, and we can, okay, let's search for something. Yeah, so we get results, and if I click on result, I get payload of events. So this is good as a proof of concept, but it may raise a question of people who will start using it. Is it good enough for long-term development? Like if we make a strategic decision that we will write internal web application like that, will we be able to solve some shortcomings here? For example, I mentioned that it gives you responsive code. But now you see, this doesn't look nice. For example, yeah, it's bad. This is bad. So we must invest in better responsiveness. Then, okay, I don't have a. How can I scroll? I just have a one scroll here, one scroll bar here. So I'm just scrolling the whole thing. This is not really professional looking application. And if we find out that we are not able to do anything more advanced than that, then probably it will just state a proof of concept. So next stage, it's we actually start learning CSS. So for me, it was a very nice way of being introduced to CSS, because when I looked at basic raw HTML view, as I showed you in the beginning, I couldn't really understand where do I start? How can I add some CSS for this to look better? But when I have this, yes, it's opinionated. They have their own opinion about what is a link color, what is a light color, and so on. But like for internal purpose, it's good enough. But now that I want to fix some small problems, I can learn exactly about what part of CSS is responsible for that. For example, adding scroll bar. If I look at, if I search for CSS prop, yeah, let me show you. There are a few occurrences. Yeah, so this is my CSS learning. Okay, I started Googling, how do I add a scroll bar? Okay, so I need to add something like CSS prop overflow Y, which means that auto, that means that if we go out of space, then it automatically adds scroll bar. And there is a height 96, it means that if it makes it, I tried with 100 and then it didn't look nice, so this is in percentage. So actually I reserve the space for the actual elements as a 96% of the whole control. So there were very few things like that. You see, I had to learn this is prop overflow Y. I had to learn this, but that was a sort of a right stage of